When people speak of purpose, they often imagine something grand, a mission that's written in the stars or a voice from the heavens declaring what they are meant to do. But life does not always function in such dramatic flair. In reality, purpose is not always found in passion-filled pursuits or spiritual pilgrimages. Sometimes purpose hides in the most ordinary of places, tucked within the folds of everyday life. And more often than not, we are simply too busy, too distracted, or too disinterested to notice it. When I took up that factory job, there was no revelation, no divine calling, no inspiration. It was just something I had to do. I needed the money, I needed structure, I needed to prove to myself and to others that I was capable of standing on my own 2 feet. So like many others, I clocked in, did what was expected, and clocked out. Day after day, the same machines, the same faces, the same routine. If someone were to look from the outside, they might say this is a dead-end job. And in the traditional sense, maybe they were right. But something unusual started happening. As I repeated the tasks, lifting, assembling, monitoring, I began to notice a strange silence within me. It wasn't boredom, it wasn't fatigue. It was a kind of space. A space where thoughts slowed down. A space where I was not resisting the work. I was simply present. No ambition, no escape plan, just presence. And in that presence, I began to feel a certain clarity that I had never experienced before. You see, our minds are always racing towards something we think will fulfill us. But in that factory, with no grand goals to chase during the workday, I had no choice but to meet myself. The repetition of the job, which I had feared would numb me, actually sharpened something inside. I started observing my own reactions. When I felt irritated, I asked why. When I felt tired, I explored whether it was physical or mental. I became a scientist of my own experience. And in this mundane environment, a certain awareness began to take root. Purpose doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers through the cracks of monotony. When we stop demanding that life entertain us, when we stop insisting that every moment be exciting, life begins to reveal something deeper. In the factory, there were moments where I felt completely aligned, not with some cosmic destiny, but with the reality of what is. Just being fully in the moment, fully in the task. And strangely, this brought a kind of satisfaction that no achievement ever had. Society has conditioned us to believe that only big things matter, that purpose has to be shiny and visible, that it must be recognized and celebrated by others. But the truth is, some of the most meaningful experiences in life happen away from the spotlight, in the shadows of daily work, in silent perseverance, in unnoticed dedication. This is where something real begins to form. I started to see the people around me differently too. That man who worked quietly in the corner, fixing parts with almost meditative focus, he wasn't just a laborer. He was an artist of precision. That woman who kept the team on track, gently but firmly, she was a leader in disguise. Everyone was playing a role, and there was a kind of beauty in it, if one had the eyes to see. The factory floor became a mirror, reflecting not just my actions, but my state of being. Purpose is not something you stumble upon, it is something you uncover, layer by layer, moment by moment. And often the first layer of that uncovering happens when you surrender to where you are instead of constantly wishing to be somewhere else. There is a strange power in doing something fully, even if it seems insignificant. A kind of inner alignment that starts to build without your permission. One day you look back and realize that the job didn't just give you a paycheck, it gave you a piece of yourself. You're always chasing something brighter, louder, bigger, but if you truly pay attention, life is constantly inviting you inward. That factory job, which looked like a temporary stop on the map of life, turned out to be a beginning, not because the job itself changed, but because I changed in relation to it. I began to see that meaning is not injected into life from the outside. It emerges when you show up fully to whatever is in front of you. And once that understanding begins to settle, you realize that there are no ordinary moments. There are no small jobs. Everything, when touched with awareness, has the potential to become sacred. This is not philosophy, this is life. The same life you and I are living right now. Discipline is a word that many people misunderstand. They think it is about restriction, about forcing yourself to do something you don't want to do. But discipline is not about suppression, it is about direction. When you do not have discipline, your energies are scattered, your focus is broken, and your actions become compulsive. You may be busy all day, yet achieve nothing of value. But with discipline, even simple actions become powerful, purposeful, and transformative. When I started working in the factory, there was no room for laziness. The machines didn't wait for inspiration, they moved, whether you were ready or not. The shifts were fixed, the breaks were limited, and the expectations were clear. In the beginning, it felt harsh. There was a part of me that resisted, wishing for flexibility, for ease, for something more comfortable. But slowly something began to shift. The structure that once felt like a cage began to feel like a skeleton, a support system. And I realized that discipline was not confining me, it was shaping me. Each morning, when the alarm rang and I resisted getting up, that small act of choosing to rise anyway was a victory. It wasn't just about going to work. It was about overcoming that part of me that always looked for an escape. The more I said yes to the routine, the more I noticed how my mind began to settle. There was less chaos inside, less chatter, more clarity. I wasn't chasing motivation anymore. I was showing up, regardless of how I felt. And that was powerful. Discipline gives you the strength to do what needs to be done, not what you feel like doing in the moment. In a world obsessed with feelings and moods, this may sound mechanical, but it's not. It's the difference between being reactive and being intentional. Without discipline, we are slaves to every passing thought, every emotional wave, every external distraction. But with discipline, we become steady, like a tree rooted deep, not shaken by every wind. It's easy to perform when things are exciting. It's easy to give your best when there's applause. But true strength is measured in those moments when no one is watching, when nothing seems to change, when the work feels dull and thankless. That's when discipline becomes your ally. It keeps you moving forward even when the path is unclear. And over time, it builds something in you that no amount of talent or passion can replace: resilience. In the factory, there was no choice but to be disciplined. The bell rang, the line moved, and you moved with it. But instead of seeing this as a burden, I started to treat it like a training ground. Every task became an opportunity to sharpen my attention. Every delay became a test of my patience. Every repetition became a lesson in consistency. And without realizing it, this external structure began to transform my internal state. Most people want freedom, but they forget without discipline, there is no real freedom. What they call freedom is often just indulgence, distraction, or escape. Real freedom comes when you have mastered your body, your mind, your emotions. And that mastery does not come by accident. It comes through discipline, through doing what is needed, not what is convenient. I began to see that discipline was not just about the job, it was about life. How you wake up, how you eat, how you speak, how you respond to stress. Everything is an opportunity to practice discipline. And when you do, a certain grace enters your life. You no longer feel like a victim of your circumstances. You become an active participant in your own growth. The environment doesn't control you, you rise above it. What I learned on that factory floor wasn't printed on any manual. It wasn't taught in any training. It came through experience, through showing up day after day without excuses. There is something incredibly humbling about doing the same task over and over and still choosing to do it with attention, with care. That's when you realize discipline is not punishment. It is devotion. Devotion to your own evolution. And slowly the discipline that was once outside of me, imposed by the clock, the manager, the system, became something internal. I no longer needed anyone to push me. I had found a rhythm, a flow, a sense of responsibility that came from within. And that is the moment when discipline becomes freedom. Because now your actions are no longer determined by circumstance or emotion. They are driven by a deeper knowing, a deeper will. In today's world, people are always looking for meaning in big things. They want to feel important, they want recognition, they want to be seen doing something grand. But what if I told you that meaning does not lie in the size of the task, but in the quality of your involvement? Every task, no matter how small, can become sacred if you do it with your full attention, your full energy, your full presence. It is not the nature of the task that determines its value. It is the depth of your engagement with it. When I was in that factory, the work was not glamorous. It was repetitive, mechanical, and often physically tiring. I wasn't creating art. I wasn't changing the world. I was tightening bolts, monitoring machines, moving parts. For someone looking from the outside, it might have looked like the kind of job you do just to get by. But over time, something shifted in me. I realized that I had two choices. Either do the work half-heartedly and count the hours, or give myself fully to it and experience something deeper. I chose the second. I began to notice the texture of the tools in my hands, the sound of the machines, the rhythm of the movements. Every little detail became part of a dance, and I was learning to move with it. This was no longer just about finishing a task, it became a form of meditation. And in that process I realized something profound. When you are fully involved in what you are doing, your mind becomes quiet. Your sense of self dissolves. You are no longer a person working a job, you become the work itself. This is the secret people often miss. They wait for something exciting to feel alive. But aliveness is not in the activity, it is in the awareness you bring to the activity. You could be flipping a switch or designing a rocket. If you are not present, it becomes meaningless. But if you are fully present, even flipping that switch can become a moment of connection, of grace. Every task has the potential to become sacred, but only if you bring your full self into it. One day, I was assigned to clean a section of the floor near the machines. It wasn't my usual duty, and I could have seen it as something beneath me. But I didn't. I decided to treat it like the most important job in the world. I cleaned with focus, with care, as if the whole factory depended on that small corner being spotless. And something strange happened. I felt peaceful. I felt purposeful. Not because of what I was doing, but because of how I was doing it. That experience stayed with me. It taught me that dignity does not come from what you do. It comes from how you do it. When you bring your full involvement to any task, you are aligning yourself with life in its purest form. Life is always happening now, in this moment. If your mind is somewhere else, worrying about the future or replaying the past, you miss the only place where life truly exists, here and now. Work, especially repetitive or physical work, gives you a powerful opportunity to come back to this moment, but only if you are willing to participate fully. Many people think spirituality is something you practice on a cushion in silence away from the world, but real spirituality is how you move through life, how you engage with your surroundings, how you treat the smallest details of your day. When you tie your shoelaces with attention, that is spiritual. When you speak to someone with total presence, that is spiritual. And when you do your job, any job, with full awareness, that is a sacred act. There is a quiet power in doing something simple with complete involvement. It humbles you, it grounds you, it brings you face to face with the reality that greatness is not in the task, but in the way you meet it. People are always searching for purpose, for meaning, but purpose is not hiding somewhere out there. It is right here, in this breath, in this step, in this moment, in this work. When you bring yourself wholly into what you are doing, meaning arises naturally. You don't have to chase it, you don't have to invent it. It simply blooms from your attention. In the factory, I met people who had been doing the same job for years. At first, I couldn't understand how they did it without getting bored. But as I watched them more closely, I saw something beautiful. They had found a rhythm. They had found grace and repetition. Their actions were fluid, almost artistic. They didn't talk much about fulfillment or success, but there was a contentment in their eyes that spoke volumes. They weren't just working, they were embodying their work. And in doing so, they had touched something eternal hidden within the ordinary. Growth is not something that happens when everything is going well. It doesn't occur when you are comfortable, secure, and surrounded by ease. Growth is born in those moments when you are stretched, when you are uncertain, when you are pushed beyond what you thought you could handle. Most people spend their lives trying to stay comfortable, not realizing that comfort is the very thing that keeps them stuck. Real transformation begins when you step outside of what is familiar and allow yourself to be challenged. When I entered the factory for the first time, I was stepping into an environment that was completely foreign to me. The noise, the rigid structure, the repetitive tasks, the physical labor, it was all so different from the rhythm I was used to. My body was not ready, my mind was resisting, and everything in me wanted to run back to a place where I felt more in control. But something inside told me to stay, and that decision, simple as it was, became the beginning of a journey that would change everything. Each day in the factory was a test, not just of my endurance, but of my willingness to stay present in discomfort. There was no luxury of slowing down when I felt tired. The machines moved at their pace, not mine. The system didn't ask if I was ready, it just demanded my full participation. In that space, I realized how much of my life had been driven by comfort. How many times I had avoided doing something just because it felt hard or unfamiliar. But here, avoiding was not an option. I had to face it, and in facing it, something within me began to awaken. The first few weeks were the most difficult. My body ached in places I didn't know existed. My mind was constantly negotiating. Should I quit? Should I speak up? Should I find something easier? But every time I chose to stay, every time I showed up again the next day, I felt a subtle shift. Not in the situation, but in myself. I was learning to hold discomfort without reacting. I was learning to stay steady even when everything inside me screamed for escape. Discomfort has a way of stripping away illusions. It shows you where your real limits are, and more importantly, how often those limits are self-imposed. In that factory, I began to see how capable I truly was. Not because someone told me, but because I experienced it firsthand. I discovered strength I didn't know I had. Not just physical strength, but emotional and mental resilience. The kind of strength that comes only when you are forced to dig deep. There were moments when I failed. When I dropped something, missed a step, or couldn't keep up. And in those moments, the temptation to feel small or defeated was strong. But each time I reminded myself that growth was not about being perfect. It was about staying in the process, about learning, adjusting, trying again. That mindset became my foundation. I stopped measuring success by how easy things felt. I started measuring it by how much I was willing to stretch. Over time, I noticed a strange thing. The same tasks that once felt impossible began to feel manageable. The same routines that once wore me down began to feel natural. What had changed? Not the job, not the system, it was me. I had expanded. My capacity had grown. And this didn't happen through inspiration or motivation. It happened through repetition, through presence, through the willingness to endure and learn. Most people want to grow, but they expect it to feel good. They want to evolve, but they resist the pain that comes with it. What I realized in the factory is that pain is not your enemy. It is your teacher. It doesn't come to destroy you. It comes to reshape you. It doesn't ask for your permission. It simply invites you to meet yourself at a deeper level. And when you do, something within you begins to shift permanently. Every discomfort I faced there became a stepping stone. Every challenge became a mirror. Every limitation became an opportunity to rise. Not in a dramatic, heroic way, but quietly, steadily, patiently. The kind of rising that no one notices, but you feel in your bones. That's the real growth. The kind that rewires you from the inside out, not with loud success, but with silent strength. People often think that success is about intelligence, about talent, about being in the right place at the right time. But there is something more fundamental than all of these. It is consistency. The ability to keep showing up day after day, regardless of how you feel, regardless of whether anyone is watching, regardless of the results. Consistency doesn't shine in the beginning, it doesn't make noise. But over time, it creates a momentum that even talent cannot match. It is not glamorous, but it is powerful. It is not loud, but it is unshakable. In the factory, no one applauded you for showing up on time. No one gave you a medal for doing the same task for the 100th time. But if you missed a day, if you slacked off even a little, it affected the whole chain. The system was built on rhythm, on reliability, on the certainty that each person would do their part. It taught me something very valuable. Your real worth is not measured by your occasional brilliance, but by your dependable presence. There were days when I didn't feel like working, days when my body was tired, when my mind was elsewhere, when everything in me wanted to stay home. But the work didn't care about my feelings. It demanded my action. And each time I chose to show up, I was reinforcing a part of myself that didn't rely on mood, on motivation, or on comfort. That part of me became stronger than my excuses. Most people wait for motivation. They wait to feel inspired, energized, ready. But consistency doesn't wait. It doesn't ask how you feel. It simply acts. And in that, there is a kind of freedom. You stop being a prisoner of your emotions. You stop letting your energy be hijacked by passing moods. You take responsibility not just for your tasks, but for your presence. You stop negotiating with your mind and start moving with purpose. The more I practiced consistency, the more I realized it was not just a discipline of the body, it was a discipline of the mind. It trained me to focus, to commit, to stay with something, even when the initial excitement wore off. And in that staying, something profound happened. I began to experience a quiet confidence, a sense of inner stability. I was no longer chasing short-term results. I was building something much deeper, trust in myself. When you are consistent, people may not notice it immediately, but over time, they begin to rely on you. They begin to trust that you will be there, that you will do what needs to be done, that you are someone who doesn't disappear when things get tough. That kind of trust cannot be bought or demanded. It is earned through repetition, through reliability, through presence. I remember one of my supervisors, a man of few words, who had been working there for over 2 decades. He wasn't the fastest or the most vocal, but everyone respected him. Why? Because he had been there every day, doing his job with quiet focus. He didn't need to talk about consistency. He embodied it. Watching him was like watching a tree that had grown strong over time, not because of any dramatic moment, but because of deep, patient roots. In the world outside, people often run after big opportunities. They jump from one thing to another, always looking for the next big breakthrough. But the real breakthrough comes when you learn to stay, to dig in, to keep showing up even when no one is clapping. That's when you begin to separate yourself, not through talent, but through stamina. Not through speed, but through stamina. Not through There is a kind of magic in consistency. It's slow magic. You don't see it right away, but one day you look back and realize how far you've come, how much stronger you've become, how many storms you've weathered without even realizing. And that strength didn't come from any one moment. It came from 1,000 small choices to stay, to try, to do, to keep moving forward. In a world addicted to instant gratification, consistency is a quiet rebellion. It is a return to something sacred. The power of showing up. When I look at what that factory job gave me, more than skills, more than knowledge, it gave me this gift. The understanding that greatness is not a peak you climb in a day. It is a path you walk every day, with quiet determination, with presence, with heart. Most people go through life thinking they need something grand to feel fulfilled. They wait for the perfect job, the big break, the ideal circumstances, but life rarely delivers fulfillment in that way. Often it comes from the places you least expect. It comes from showing up fully where you are, rather than waiting to be somewhere else. That factory job, as simple and ordinary as it appeared, became the soil in which something deep within me began to grow. Not because the work was special, but because I stopped looking outside and started turning inward. There is a quiet beauty in ordinary life that many people miss. They look for excitement, for stimulation, for highs. But there is a richness in simplicity, a depth in the mundane, a clarity in repetition. In that factory, I was surrounded by machines, oil stains, and the hum of routine. And yet, in that very space, I found something many people search for their entire lives. Clarity. Not the kind of clarity that comes from thinking too much, but the clarity that emerges when your mind stops racing and simply becomes still. In the beginning, everything felt mechanical. The tasks were defined, the process was fixed, and there wasn't much room for creativity. But as I settled into that space, something shifted. I started paying attention not just to the machines, but to myself. I noticed how my thoughts moved, how my emotions responded to pressure, how my body carried tension. And slowly the work became a mirror. It showed me where I was reactive, where I was impatient, where I lacked discipline, not in theory but in real, tangible moments. When you are deeply present, even a small task can become a doorway to self-awareness. I began to notice the difference between doing something just to finish it and doing it with attention, with care. That difference changed the quality of my experience. What was once boring became meditative. What was once repetitive became rhythmic. I began to see that life was not asking me to be extraordinary, it was asking me to be fully here now. That's when fulfillment began to arise, not from achievement, but from alignment. There's a myth that fulfillment lies in freedom from structure, in doing whatever you want whenever you want. But sometimes structure is what sharpens you. It gives you something to push against. It brings discipline. And in discipline there is a strange kind of freedom, the freedom to master yourself. In the factory the schedule was strict, the process was fixed, and my role was clear. But within that frame I learned to find flow. I learned to bring beauty into the mundane, to bring presence into the ordinary, and that became deeply fulfilling. Many people think that their environment has to change for them to feel better. They want a new job, a new city, a new relationship. But what if fulfillment is not about changing the outer world, but about shifting your inner world? That's what the factory taught me. The same routine, the same tasks, the same space. Yet, when my perception changed, everything changed. The work didn't get easier, I got deeper. I stopped treating it as something I had to endure and started relating to it as something I could learn from. One of the most profound lessons I learned was that fulfillment is not an event, it's a practice. It's something you cultivate, not something you wait for. You don't stumble upon it. You nurture it. You build it, one conscious action at a time. Every time I showed up and gave my best, not because someone was watching, not because I expected a reward, but simply because it was the right thing to do. I was cultivating a sense of purpose, a sense of dignity, a sense of connection to something larger than myself. Sometimes people ask, how do I find purpose? The real question is, how do I bring purpose into what I'm already doing? Purpose is not out there, hiding in some special task or role. It is right here, waiting in the way you do what you do, waiting in your posture, your breath, your effort. When I stopped looking for meaning in grand gestures and started pouring myself into the small things, life began to feel whole, complete. And in that completeness, fulfillment naturally blossomed. We all want to feel alive, to feel that what we do matters, but often we are looking in the wrong place. We chase success, status, stimulation, but what we really long for is presence, connection, integrity. These don't come from outside. They are cultivated inside, through awareness, through intention, through the way we live our ordinary moments. That's what the factory gave me. Not a glamorous job, but a grounded way of being. A way of finding depth in simplicity, stillness in action, and fulfillment in the heart of routine.